As I stood in the sterile hospital room, the unmistakable scent of antiseptic in the air, I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my ears, too loud, too frantic. My name is Alexis, I'm 37 years old, and a chief petty officer in the US Navy, but none of that mattered here. Here, I was just a granddaughter watching her grandmother slip away. A thin sheet covered Grandma's frail form, her once vibrant hands now resting limply at her sides. I had flown back from Kuwait for a couple of days, expecting to spend time with my mom, but instead, I found myself alone, staring at the slow, steady rise and fall of her chest, praying it wouldn't stop. The room felt as if it were closing in on me. Each breath I took seemed to fill my lungs with a sense of dread. My parents were in Cabo, blissfully unaware of the ticking clock that was my grandmother's heart. I could only imagine them lounging on the beach, with margaritas in hand, while I was left to navigate this nightmare alone. The tension in the air was palpable, each soft beep of the monitors a reminder that time was slipping away, like grains of sand through my fingers. I had flown home thinking I would have the comfort of family, yet here I was, feeling more isolated than I ever had in the Navy. I gently placed my hand on Grandma's, our fingers barely touching as if afraid to connect. She had been my rock growing up, her stories of resilience and love were the foundation of my upbringing. Now, as I watched her face sag with the weight of illness, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. I had sacrificed so much for my country, and yet here I was unable to protect the woman who had nurtured me through my own childhood storms. It felt wrong, the way the world continued to spin with vibrant life while we stood on the precipice of loss. Just as I was about to give in to despair, I remembered the many times I had stared death in the face while serving my country. I thought of the sailors I had lost, how I had held their families together. I had always prided myself on my ability to navigate treacherous waters, but for some reason, this felt different. The stakes were higher. It wasn't just duty or honor at play but love, a more profound, gut-wrenching force that I could hardly stand to face. I wanted to scream at my parents for abandoning this moment, for choosing sun and fun over family and grief. This was our grandmother, not just an old woman fading away but the very woman who had taught us what it meant to love, to sacrifice, to embrace life. As the minutes dragged on and the sunlight dimmed outside the hospital window, I felt a deep resolve settle in my bones. I would be the one to bear witness to Grandma's final moments, to tell her how much she meant to me, to lay bare all those years of love and gratitude. I needed her to know she was not alone, even if the rest of my family had chosen to take a vacation at the most critical moment. I leaned in closer, speaking softly as I brushed my thumb over her fragile skin. "I'm here, Grandma. You're not alone." Before I go on, subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell the untold stories of military women, courage, sacrifice, and truth. Your support helps more voices like mine be heard. I stepped off the plane, the sterile smell of the airport mixing with the scent of sunblock from tourists who had just returned from sun-soaked vacations in Cabo. My heart sank as I pushed through the crowd, shoulders tight from what felt like the weight of the world resting on my uniform. It had been almost a year since I last saw my mom, and I was hoping for a warm embrace, a shared laugh over family stories and what had happened since I deployed to Kuwait. Instead, I found a voicemail from her, weak and shaken, relaying the news that Grandma was in hospice care, her time running short. In the Navy, I had learned to steel myself against the emotional turbulence of life, yet this felt like a storm my training hadn't prepared me for. I drove to our family home, which hadn't changed much in the years I'd been away. The faded shutters and the overgrown hydrangeas looked just as I remembered, framing a place filled with love and countless memories. But as I stepped inside, a peculiar emptiness enveloped me. The usual laughter and warmth seemed to have drained from the walls, replaced by an eerie silence that wrapped around me like an unwelcome shroud. My parents had flown off to Cabo for a much-needed getaway, leaving me with the realization that I was now the only one holding vigil for Grandma. I understood they needed time away from the chaos, but it felt so painfully wrong that they were basking in sun while Grandma lay alone on borrowed time. I made my way to the hospice facility, my heart racing with every passing mile. The drive seemed endless, and the weight of anxiety pressed down on my chest as images of my grandmother flickered through my mind, her warm smile, those little moments where she would weave tales of her past, and how she would always find a way to make every family gathering feel special. Now, she was lying in a hospital bed, perhaps drifting in and out of consciousness, and I could only hope she knew I was coming. The roads felt unforgiving as I navigated through a world that seemed to be carrying on just fine while mine stood still. When I arrived, the scent of antiseptic hit me like a brick wall. I was met by the receptionist, who offered a sympathetic smile, as if she sensed the storm brewing inside me. The hallway felt long and sterile, each step heavy with the unshakable dread of facing the inevitable. I finally pushed through the door to her room, and there she was, frail and pale, her once bright eyes now dull and weary. "Grandma?" I whispered, fighting to keep my voice steady. She turned her head slowly, recognition flickering momentarily in her eyes. It took everything I had to keep my composure, to not let the tears spill over as I took her hand in mine, feeling the fragile bones beneath my fingers. "I'm here," I managed to say, though my own heart felt as if it were shattering. As I sat beside her, memories flooded back, stories of her childhood, her resilience through hardships, the countless lessons she had taught me without even trying. I realized I wasn't just there to comfort her, I was there to connect the threads of our lives, to carry her spirit forward in my own. I squeezed her hand gently, not ready to let go of the wisdom wrapped in every wrinkle of her skin. I didn't know how much time we had left, but I knew I wanted to honor every second. My world had shifted the moment I stepped into this room, and I promised myself that I would be present, not just as her granddaughter, but as someone who understood the fragility of life, especially after my years of service. The weight of my uniform felt different now, more like a shield, ready to protect the things that mattered most. The air felt heavy as I stepped into the dimly lit room where Grandma lay. The first thing that hit me was the antiseptic smell, immediately flooding my senses with memories of long hospital stays and sterile waiting rooms. It had been a while since I had seen her, the last time was on one of my brief visits home, where she had held my hand tightly, eyes sparkling with pride as she told stories of when my dad was her little boy. It felt like stepping into a time capsule, one that had survived the ravages of time but was now fraying at the edges. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the wave of emotion rising in my throat. My eyes roamed over her frail body, the familiar quilt draped over her looking more like a shroud than a symbol of comfort. She had always taken such pride in her crafting, each stitch a testament to her love for her family. I couldn't shake the feeling that this quilt, once vibrant and warm, now mirrored her fading spirit. I remembered countless afternoons spent at her kitchen table, her gentle hands guiding me through patterns and colors, teaching me how to take something ordinary and turn it into something special. Now, she seemed like a ghost of herself, and I couldn't reconcile the vibrant woman I knew with the shell before me. As I sat next to her, I could almost hear the laughter that used to fill this space. My parents were off in Cabo, blissfully unaware of the urgency of the situation, and I was struck by the unfairness of it all. They had chosen sun-soaked beaches over the woman who had nurtured and raised them. It was a stark reminder of the distance I often felt even within my own family. I shook my head, trying to cast away my frustration. At that moment, it didn't matter what they were doing, all that mattered was that my grandma was alone, and I was the only one there to hold her hand. The sound of her labored breaths filled the silence, each exhale a soft reminder of time slipping away. I closed my eyes, willing myself to remember our last family gathering, the holiday not so long ago where her laughter had filled the room, a melody I hadn't fully appreciated until now. I had been away on deployment, and the phone calls were too brief, too infrequent. I had always assumed there would be time to return, to sit with her and really listen to her stories again. But here I was, confronted with the fleeting nature of life, and a knot tightened in my chest. Time had betrayed us both. I reached out, taking her hand in mine, the coolness of her skin sending shivers up my spine. "Grandma," I whispered, fighting back tears. "I'm here." In that moment, it didn't matter that I was a chief petty officer in the Navy with missions and responsibilities waiting for me. All that mattered was this bond, this love that transcended any rank or title. I felt a deep sense of responsibility wash over me, a duty to be present, to ensure she didn't face the end alone. It felt surreal, being thousands of miles away one moment and thrust into this heart-wrenching reality the next. I brushed her hair away from her forehead, wishing I could brush away the years and the pain that life had etched onto her features. My heart ached, knowing I might not have another chance to share stories, to laugh with her, or to hold her knowing she needed me as much as I needed her. The moment I stepped into my childhood home, the air felt heavy with memories I wasn't quite ready to face. The familiar scent of cinnamon and old books wrapped around me like a thick blanket, but it did little to comfort. I paused just inside the door, the sound of my parents' laughter drifting down from the balcony where they lounged after another perfect day in Cabo. I was supposed to be happy to see them, but I only felt an ache spreading in my chest, thickening like storm clouds brewing overhead. My mom was out of reach, her paradise on a sun-soaked beach, while my grandmother lay in bed, clinging to the fragile threads of life like someone gripping a quickly fading photograph. Grandma had always been the anchor in our family, the one whose stories illuminated the past for me. As a girl, I spent countless hours by her side, soaking in tales of her youth, her mischievous laughter echoing through the old house, her eyes sparkling with the life she had lived so fiercely. Now, however, those same eyes were dimmed, clouded by pain and the stark reality of her fading health. Walking into her dimly lit room, I found her frail body curled beneath a thin quilt, her breaths shallow and labored. It felt surreal to see this once vibrant woman reduced to a shadow of herself, her stories untold and fading just like the soft light of the setting sun outside her window. I took a seat beside her, grasping her thin hand in my own, trying to convey strength through touch. I needed her to know that she wasn't alone, that despite the miles and the months, I was here. When her eyes opened and locked onto mine, a flicker of recognition ignited in her fading gaze. "Alexis," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but we both understood that her calling my name was a lifeline, pulling me back into the embrace of family history that shaped me. "I'm here, Grandma," I replied, my voice trembling. "Tell me about the time you," I started, but the words caught in my throat, choked by the enormity of what was happening. How could I ask her to relive those stories now, when it felt like I was desperate to hold on to them while she was slipping away? My mind revolted against the silence that hung between us, heavy with unspoken words and lost time. Why hadn't my parents come back sooner? How could they enjoy their luxury vacation while their own mother lay in a hospital bed? Thoughts boiled within me, causing a simmering resentment I didn't want to acknowledge. I had always understood the sacrifices of military life and the pressures that came with my role, yet this felt different, too personal. It was hard to reconcile my duty to serve with the obligation to family, to be there when it counted. I often wondered whether the sacrifices I made for my country were worth the cost of losing touch with those I loved the most. As I sat there, listening to the shallow breaths and feeling the warm weight of her hand in mine, I realized how fragile our connections truly were. My grandmother's strength had shaped our family, yet she was now the silent witness to our distance and dissensions. It pained me to think that she was dying alone while we were scattered between duty and desire. I could feel a deeper conflict nestled within me, a pull to stand against the things that divided us while knowing that the pressure of our individual lives often outweighed the ties that bound us. How could we possibly draw closer when we were all fighting our own battles? That evening, I lay in my old bedroom, staring up at the ceiling, the shadows dancing in the dim light. The world outside swirled with summer warmth, but in my heart, a chill settled in. I could hear my parents' laughter carrying through the walls, juxtaposed against the silence of my grandmother's room. It was a stark reminder of the choices that had led us here, choices that sometimes felt insurmountable. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of history pressing upon me, knowing that while I could not change the past, I had to find a way to make sense of it all, to stitch together the fabric of our family before it unraveled completely. The drive to the hospital was a blur of muted colors and thoughts that raced faster than the car. I was back in my hometown, the one I had fled to chase a career in the Navy, but everything I saw was tinged with sadness and urgency. My heart raced as I mentally prepared myself to see Grandma. She had always been the backbone of our family, the one who raised me when my parents were caught up in their own lives. But now, she lay alone in a sterile hospital room, fighting a battle that felt impossibly unfair. I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the right decision to come back, whether I was truly worthy of the space I occupied in this family. The hospital's fluorescent lights were harsh, and the smell of antiseptic clung to my clothes. I shuffled down the corridor, passing nurses who barely glanced up from their duties, each absorbed in their own world. My Navy uniform felt stiff and strange here, yet it was a part of my armor, something that reminded me of who I was when I wasn't grappling with feelings of inadequacy. I pressed a hand to the cool surface of the wall, trying to steady myself as I recalled the days Grandma would sit me down in her living room, stitching quilts while sharing stories of my father's childhood. I had always admired her strength. Now, all I could think of was my own perceived weakness. When I finally stepped into her room, the sight of her frail body, nearly swallowed by the hospital bed, tugged at my heart. Machines beeping steadily filled the silence, but it was her labored breathing that felt loudest. I wanted to be brave, to offer comfort, but I felt like a child again, wanting to curl up in her lap and let her tell me everything would be okay. I approached her, hesitant. There was so much I wanted to tell her, to affirm my love, to reassure her that I had grown, that I was strong, but the words caught in my throat. It was as if I needed her approval for the life I had chosen, as if I still craved the validation I had sought all those years ago. Grandma? The word escaped me, trembling as I spoke. She opened her eyes slowly, recognition flickering across her pale face. I reached for her hand, grasping her fingers, desperate for the warmth that had always been a source of comfort. I'm here. I tried to keep my voice steady, but the tremor betrayed me. For a moment, I felt the weight of all the unspoken feelings between us, a mixture of gratitude, guilt, and a yearning for the approval I had always wanted. I wanted so much for her to see the woman I had become, to understand that my seemingly endless absences were not born from neglect but from a desire to forge something meaningful, to protect and serve. As I sat by her bedside, I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. Time felt like a relentless thief, robbing me of the chance to show her the depth of my love and admiration. I fought to keep my breathing steady, to maintain the composure I had used so often in the Navy, but the emotional chokehold was unrelenting. I moved closer, whispering, "I missed you so much, Grandma." I hoped that somehow, even in her frail state, she could hear the truth in my voice, the regret of not being the granddaughter she deserved and the fervent wish to make things right. The ache of proving my worthiness hung in the air, a weight heavy on my heart, and I silently vowed that I would do everything right, even if it was too late. Standing in my grandmother's dimly lit room, the sounds of my family's joyful laughter from Cabo felt like a foreign language. I was supposed to be on leave, reconnecting with relatives and sharing stories from my recent deployment in Kuwait. Instead, I was faced with the stark reality that my grandma, a woman who wore strength like a badge, was slipping away. The beeping of her medical machines punctuated the silence, a relentless reminder of her fragile state, while I stood frozen in the doorway, unsure of what to do. Every time I visited her, I hoped for a glimmer of the spirited woman who had once taken me fishing and taught me to appreciate the beauty of the ocean. But today, her once bright eyes were clouded, and the wrinkles on her face seemed to deepen as I watched. I could feel the weight of my absence from her life and the inadequacies of not being there when she needed me most. The guilt crashed over me like a wave, but I knew I couldn't let it drown me. I had to channel my energy into being there for her now, no matter how daunting that task felt. As I pulled up a chair next to her bed, I grasped her frail hand, its warmth a fleeting comfort. "Grandma, it's me, Lexi," I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion. I searched her face for recognition, relishing the moments where her lips would twitch into a faint smile, like the old days, when she would boast about my accomplishments at family gatherings. I wanted to reassure her, to remind her of the strong woman she had always been, but the tears that threatened to spill from my eyes blurred my vision. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. This wasn't just about her, I needed to let her know that I was here, that she wasn't alone. As the afternoon sun slipped lower in the sky, I began to share stories, recounting my experiences in Kuwait, emphasizing the beauty and the challenges of my service. I told her about my team, the laughter we shared, and the way the camaraderie had made the bleakest days bearable. Grandma's fingers tightened around mine, and I could have sworn I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. I wanted to impart the strength I had gained through my own challenges, to remind her that her legacy of resilience lived on in me. Despite the physical distance created by my military life, I was here, holding her hand, and fighting alongside her in spirit. In that moment, I realized that overcoming wasn't just about confronting my own fears or anxieties, it was also about sharing strength and hope with those we love. It was easy to feel powerless in the face of death, but I was determined to turn this emotional tumult into something tangible. So, I told her I loved her over and over, hoping it would seep into the very fiber of her being. I reminisced about fishing trips and baking cookies, hoping to coax some of her memories back to the surface, creating a bridge that spanned the gap of our shared experiences. My voice became my anchor, holding us both steady as we navigated the stormy waters of this heartbreaking moment together. I stood in the sterile hospital room, its fluorescent lights humming low like an ominous clock ticking away my grandmother's remaining moments. The beeping machines and the faint scent of antiseptic swirled around me, a sharp reminder of the fragility of life. I hadn't seen Grandma in years. A part of me thought it would always be easier to visit when she was healthy, when I could joke about her famous apple pie or laugh at her insistence that I should be wearing a dress instead of my Navy uniform. But life doesn't wait for convenience, and the lump in my throat reminded me that I had missed my chance to say goodbye in a way that felt right. I had flown in just hours before from Kuwait, my heart pounding for a different reason as I traded in the thrill of my naval duties for the quiet dread of watching someone I loved slip away. That morning, my parents had sent me a postcard from Cabo, beach sunsets and their smiling faces, the ocean's waves crashing into the shore, cool drinks in hand. Even though deep in my gut I felt a sense of resentment, I pushed it aside. It wasn't their fault they didn't know. They had planned that trip long before Grandma's health took a downturn. But I couldn't help wondering if they would still have gone if they had known their matriarch was wasting away in a hospital bed, alone. I settled into the stiff chair next to her bedside, my heart heavy but resolute. I wouldn't let her die without someone by her side, someone to whisper the stories we had shared and to remind her of all the love we had for her. As I held her frail hand, I could feel the warmth seep away like the memories of summers spent in her kitchen, flour dusting the air as she taught me to bake. I could almost hear her voice urging me to find the strength that I fought so hard to cultivate in my career. So I spoke to her, recounting tales of my latest missions and my aspirations, all the while hoping that somewhere beneath the tranquil surface, she could hear me. Time slipped through my fingers, and I found myself reflecting on my own journey. I had always been driven to excel, to persist, to grow. But this felt different. In the span of my 48 hours back home, I began to recognize that persistence isn't always about climbing to the top. Sometimes, it's about the moments in between, the willingness to bend and break, to embrace vulnerability. I talked to her about my dreams of leading a team, about how I had learned to adapt and overcome in the Navy, facing challenges head-on rather than shying away. I wanted her to see that her resilience had carried through to me, that I honored her spirit in every mission I undertook. As the sun dipped below the horizon outside her window, I realized that my grandmother had been my anchor in many storms, imparting wisdom that had shaped the woman I had become. I could feel her slipping away, yet instead of despair, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the lessons I had learned from her. I clung to her hand tighter, promising silently that I would carry her strength with me, that I would continue to persist, to fight for what mattered. She may not have been able to hear me anymore, but I hoped that in those final moments, she felt the love that wrapped around us both, a testament to our unbreakable bond that would live on even as she could not. The moment I stepped into the stark, antiseptic room, the scent of disinfectant hit me like a wall. I had flown straight from Kuwait to see my mom, a trip that was meant to be filled with laughter and family reunions. Instead, I found myself facing the harsh reality that my grandmother was lying in a hospital bed, drowning in what felt like a slow, suffocating silence. My parents were in Cabo, sipping cocktails by the beach, and here I was, left to navigate this emotional minefield alone. The sight of my grandmother, once vibrant and laughing, now frail and still, made my heart clench. I swallowed hard to push back the tears that threatened to spill over and ruin my carefully constructed facade. As I moved closer to her bed, I felt the weight of regret bearing down on me. I hadn't visited nearly enough in the past few years. Between deployments and duty calls, life had a way of piling up hurdles that made it easy to put off what truly mattered. I reached out, gently taking her hand in mine. It felt like holding on to a forgotten memory. Her skin was cool and thin, reminding me of the stories she used to tell me about how things were when she was my age. I wanted to reach for those stories, to bring them back, but all I could do was sit there, helpless, hoping for some sign of recognition. I yearned for her to open her eyes, to smile like she used to, but the dim light in the room mirrored the fading spark that was once her spirit. I couldn't help but remember the long hours she spent with me as a child, teaching me how to make her famous pasta sauce, the way she'd laugh at my silly attempts and say, "You'll get there, Alexis." Those afternoons spent in her tiny kitchen, surrounded by the aroma of garlic and basil, now felt like relics of a life I had drifted too far away from. I was supposed to be the strong one, the one who had faced terrifying situations at sea and handled them with poise. But sitting here, watching the woman who had shaped so much of who I am slip away, I felt utterly powerless. Tears trickled down my cheeks as I thought about the burdens I had taken on and how I had allowed time to slip through my fingers like sand. Just then, her eyes fluttered open, and for a brief moment, a flicker of recognition crossed her face. I leaned in, my voice trembling as I whispered, "Hi, Grandma." "It's me, Alexis." Her gaze was distant, and I could see the confusion in her eyes, but she squeezed my hand ever so slightly, a faint reminder that she was still there, tethered to this world by the faintest thread. I felt a rush of warmth at that small gesture, a connection that transcended the fog of illness. I talked to her about everything, my time away, the medal I had recently earned, and how much I missed her cooking. I could barely keep my voice steady, hoping that somehow, my words would break through the haze that had settled around us. As I sat there, pouring my heart out, I realized that I was saying goodbye, and it hurt more than I could have imagined. I had been trained to face danger, to navigate storms and conflicts, but this was entirely different. Here, I was stripped of my titles and ranks, vulnerable in the face of loss. The tears I had held back felt like a release, a realization that I had been battling a war within myself, trying to balance duty and love. My grandmother was slipping away, and I was left with the heavy truth that sometimes, the most challenging trials occur not in the chaos of battle but in the stillness of a hospital room, where the heartache of saying goodbye echoes louder than any bomb exploding in distant lands. The moment I received the email from my brother, my heart sank. "Grandma's not doing well," it said, the words stark and unforgiving. I had just touched down in San Diego after my deployment in Kuwait, eager to see my mom after months apart. Instead, I found myself standing in the sterile waiting room of a hospital, the smell of antiseptic stinging my nostrils. My parents were off in Cabo, enjoying their vacation while I held down the fort. That's when the reality hit me, the weight of being the one left behind. As I sat there, the fluorescent lights buzzed above me, the constant sound a torturous reminder of what was happening. Grandma had always been my rock, the only one who truly understood the choices I made, choices my parents still struggled to accept. I ran my fingers over the worn leather of my navy jacket, the fabric familiar and comforting, yet it felt heavy in that moment. I thought of my peers, the friends I'd made during my service. They would have been here for each other, just as we pledged to always have each other's backs in the line of duty. It was hard, so damn hard, to reconcile that support system with my own family's absence. The nurse finally led me to her room, and I hesitated at the door. My grandmother lay frail in her bed, her once lively spirit diminished to labored breaths and the soft beep of the machines that surrounded her. My heart ached in my chest, a gnawing feeling of helplessness. I approached slowly, her skin pale and brittle, and I was struck again by my isolation. It felt so unjust that my parents could be sipping cocktails under the sun while I stood on this precipice of grief. In the Navy, I'd faced moments of danger and uncertainty, but this, witnessing someone so treasured slipping away, felt like the hardest battle of all. As I sat beside her, holding her hand, I remembered the stories she used to tell about her time during the war. How she had fought just to keep her family safe and how those memories shaped who I had become. Her whispers had always filled me with a sense of duty, a determination to protect others. But now, as I looked into her fading eyes, I felt an overwhelming urge to do something, anything, for her. And yet, all I could offer was my presence. It was maddening to feel so powerless, and for the first time, I knew the true meaning of vulnerability. The clock ticked, counting down every precious second, and I leaned in closer. I needed her to know she wasn't alone, that I was here. As if sensing my turmoil, she cracked a weak smile, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like we were together again, my anchor reminding me that I was still part of something bigger. My phone buzzed, a text from a fellow chief petty officer, asking about my trip back. I paused, fingers hovering over the screen, torn between sharing my heartache and maintaining the brave front we so often wore in our line of work. In that moment, I realized that recognition and validation could mean so many things. Perhaps it didn't come from accolades or ranks but from simply showing up when it mattered, even when it felt like I was fighting alone. Walking through the front door of my childhood home, I was flooded with a cacophony of memories that felt both comforting and suffocating. The air smelled of lemon-scented disinfectant, a scent my mother favored to keep the house spotless, but today it only heightened the sickly sweet odor of impending loss. I had flown in from Kuwait expecting to hug her, to laugh about old times, and finally confront the elephant in the room, my grandmother's declining health. Instead, my parents had whisked themselves away to Cabo, leaving me to navigate this turbulent sea alone. I felt the weight of their absence on my shoulders, a burden I was not ready to bear. I had learned to be strong in defense of my country, but strength feels different when it comes to family. My grandmother had raised me, taught me how to tie my shoes and ride a bike, and now, in the last chapter of her life, I could do nothing but watch as the light in her eyes dimmed. I found her in the small bedroom at the end of the hall, her frail body swallowed by a quilt that had seen better days. I held my breath as I pushed the door open, unwilling to face what lay beyond. This was the woman who had told me, year after year, that my dreams were worth pursuing, that I could conquer the world. But now she lay there, barely aware of my presence, as if she were adrift on another shore altogether. "Grandma," I whispered, slipping into the room, my heart aching at the sight of her. The machines beeped softly, a reminder that life teetered on the edge of a fragile balance. I sat beside her, the chill of the plastic chair biting into my skin, but I barely felt it. "It's Alexis. I'm back." Her eyelids fluttered, and for a moment, I thought I saw recognition spark in her gaze, but it vanished like a fleeting shadow. No grand reunions, no warm embrace, only a void that hollered back at me. Tears prickled my eyes as I reached out to hold her hand. It was colder than I remembered, and I couldn't help but feel that our time was slipping through my fingers like grains of sand. As I sat there, the silence wrapping around us like an unwelcome shroud, the gravity of my parents' absence pressed harder against my chest. They had made the choice to prioritize a vacation over family obligations, a decision that felt like a stab to my core. "They're just trying to relax," I told myself, but deep down, I was furious. How could they abandon her? How could they leave me to carry the weight of this burden alone? Anger stirred in me, a rich cocktail mixed with disappointment and betrayal. I wanted to yell at them, to make them feel the sharp edges of my pain, but what good would it do? I was stuck here, standing between my grandmother's fading spirit and my own simmering resentment. Just then, her frail fingers tightened around mine, and for the first time, I could sense her presence beneath the haze of illness. "Stay," she whispered, her voice barely audible but clear enough to break through the fog that had engulfed my thoughts. I nodded, a fresh wave of tears spilling down my cheeks as I realized this wasn't just about me. I had the duty to honor her, to be present in this sacred moment regardless of my own frustrations. The world beyond those walls could wait. I finally understood that love often requires us to confront our deepest fears and show up for those who have shown up for us. So I settled into my chair, surrendering to the stillness, determined to hold on while I still could. As I stood in the hospital room, the sterile scent of antiseptic clung to the air, a stark contrast to the warmth once present in my childhood home. Grandma lay frail on the white sheets, her breathing slow and shallow. I wished I could transfer some of my own strength to her, but it felt like I was grasping at smoke. I leaned in close, my heart pounding in my chest. Each breath she took seemed like a battle, and I couldn't help but think of all the times she'd been my anchor during storms. Now, it was my turn to want to be there for her, yet all I felt was the unsettling weight of helplessness. My parents were God knows where, sipping cocktails in Cabo, and here I was, her only visitor, grappling with the reality that she was slipping away. I had expected to find comfort in her presence, maybe even a sense of connection despite the unsettling circumstances. Instead, the distance between us felt insurmountable. I glanced at the framed pictures on the walls, remnants of a life filled with laughter and love, memories that now felt overshadowed by impending loss. I wanted to call my mom, but what could I say? Hey, while you're soaking up the sun, Grandma's fading, and I'm alone with her? I already knew the excuse that would follow. Alexis, we'll be home soon. Just enjoy your time there. How could they not understand how wrong it felt to prioritize a vacation over a dying matriarch? As the hours dragged on, I felt as if I were caught in a riptide, pulled between duty and heartache. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed above me, illuminating the anxiety etched on my face. I could hear the incessant beeping of machines, count the minutes until her next dose of pain medication, but it only served to heighten my frustration. I had sacrificed so much for my family, for my service, and yet here I was, alone in the emotional trenches, surrounded by the hushed whispers of nurses who glanced in at my grandma with pity in their eyes. I almost envied them. They had the power to help, while I felt frozen in place, spellbound by grief. The sound of her labored breaths filled the silence around us. "Remember the summer I took you to the beach?" I whispered softly, hoping to draw her back into the present, even for a moment. Her eyes fluttered, and I could see the flicker of recognition, a brief spark that felt precious against the heavy backdrop of our reality. I shared stories, voiced all the little things I loved about her, her homemade cookies, our fishing trips, her laughter that always filled the room. Each word was a plea, an invocation of a better time, urging her to hold on just a little longer. But deep down, I feared that my efforts were futile. When silence enveloped the room again, I felt a profound resignation settle over me. I'd fought battles in the Navy that had left scars, but none were as heavy as this. I could almost hear the official statement echo in my head, "It's time to say goodbye." I wanted to scream at the universe, to demand why so many moments felt squandered, why I had to be here alone while my parents were off claiming vacation as their priority. Yet, as I sat quietly beside Grandma, tears pooling in my eyes, I knew that this was my fight to face. I would not abandon her like the rest of them had. In that moment, I made a promise. I would hold her hand in the darkness, be the bridge to the memories we shared, and honor the love that had once filled every corner of our lives. As I sit here, looking out at the sunset painting the sky with vibrant hues of pink and orange, I find a certain clarity washing over me. The ocean breeze rakes through my hair, lifting the weight of guilt that has lingered like a storm cloud ever since I came back from Kuwait. I had expected my family to rally together, to be there for Grandma as she slipped away into the unknown. Yet, the stark reality is that my parents chose Cabo over the woman who spent her life nurturing them. Knowing I was left to shoulder the burden of saying goodbye to Grandma alone, I feel a mixture of anger and understanding simmering within me. I'm no longer the little girl seeking validation from those who belittled my dreams and ambitions. I'm a chief petty officer in the Navy. I've carried the weight of so much more than they could ever imagine. I think back on my childhood. Those years spent under their critical eyes taught me to shrink myself, to mute my voice. They would scoff at my aspirations, reminding me that I was just a girl, just a dreamer. But the truth is, those early judgments fueled a fire within me. The girl who they thought would fade into the background has transformed into a woman who leads and commands respect. I am no longer defined by their doubts. I've realized that I can chart my own course without looking back for approval. My experience in Kuwait has shown me resilience, and the bittersweet end of my grandmother's journey has reminded me of the importance of family and the choices we make. The last moments with Grandma still play on repeat in my mind. Sitting by her bedside, I held her frail hand, feeling the warmth of a life well lived. She had her own stories of struggle and triumph, of heartbreak and love. I whispered words of gratitude into her ear, recounting the lessons she had taught me, everything she had instilled in me, courage, kindness, and the relentless pursuit of one's dreams. Even in the face of death, I saw her spirit shining through, a beacon of strength reminding me that I could carve a path of my own. As I watched her take her final breath, I felt her spirit merge with mine. I realized we weren't just family, we were warriors in our own right. After she passed, I was flooded with emotions, anger at my parents for their choices, grief for Grandma, but also an unexpected sense of liberation. I wasn't just a bystander in my life anymore, I was the architect of my future. The Navy taught me discipline and tenacity, but it was this experience that taught me the importance of choosing where to devote my energy. I was no longer bound by family obligations or the expectations of others. I was free to embrace who I was and carry forth Grandma's legacy in my own way. It felt like stepping out of a shadow and into a light I had almost forgotten existed. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over everything, I take a deep breath and allow myself to feel whole. I raise my head high, unafraid of what lies ahead. I forge on, carving my path, knowing that each step is filled with purpose, each moment is a tribute to those I love, and each decision is my own. I am no longer tethered to the past. I am an independent woman, a protector, a soldier, and a granddaughter who will carry her grandma's spirit into the future. And that thought fills me with an indescribable strength, as radiant and unyielding as the sun dipping into the sea. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from.